Hey everyone, welcome back to Pop Incursions. I'm Nico and today we are going to take Death's hand in ours as we break down episode 7 of Agatha All Along. This is Lilia's trial, and like what we've seen in Loki season 2, time is not linear and Lilia uses this fact to complete her trial. The Salem 7 also come to their end and a major reveal takes place. Stay tuned.
Heard you guys were having a party.
Say what?
Avengers!
Sorry, what now?
And I will return for judgment.
May I next meet you?
Avengers! Confusion is but the first step on the journey to knowledge.
Show some respect.
She-Hulk smash.
It's Shang-Chi.
Higher, further, faster.
You need to back off.
Down the road to glory at the end.
So episode 7, like all other episodes, is titled using lines from the Ballad of the Witch's Road, in this case, Death's Hand in Mine. And this actually has two meanings, one referring to the fact that in this episode, Lilia accepts her fate and takes death head on, and that Rio Vidal has been revealed to be Death. Actual Death, the embodiment of Death, also known as Lady Death or Mistress Death from the comics. And while this is something that we kind of already had an idea of and we have been speculating, now it has been confirmed, and I was still gagged because what a reveal. I mean, she looked scary as hell, and when I was watching this by myself at 2 a.m, not the type of thing you want to see when it's all dark around you, but epic nonetheless. This episode begins with Lilia falling, and this reminds me of when you're asleep and you are dreaming that you're falling, and then like you jump and wake yourself up. Now we also see that Lilia is already in the Glinda the Good Witch costume, meaning her trial has begun. We then go back to the Witch's Road and Agatha and Billy are walking, and Agatha says to Billy,
Get a nosebleed trying that hard to read my mind.
and she says, just ask me whatever questions you have. So the first one, he says, where's Rio? Which is what we're all thinking, but she says, any question except that one. And then she says, you don't have any queries for your old babysitter? Obviously referring to the fact that in WandaVision, Agatha offered to babysit Billy and Tommy when Wanda was having a case of the Mondays, but it also refers back to her first comic appearances when she was the babysitter for the Fantastic Four kids, Valeria and Franklin Richards. Agatha says, I'm your mom's best friend. And she pretty much was Wanda's best friend in WandaVision until she ran out of patience. But Billy says,
She's not my mom. I have a mom.
someone may not be too pleased that Wanda took down the Hex over keeping her own family, but Billy has likely grown quite attached to Rebecca Kaplan, who would now be his biological mother since changing bodies. But I think above both of these, Billy doesn't seem to remember much, at least before the accident. And that doesn't just include William Kaplan's memories, but I also think he doesn't remember much of his life prior to swapping bodies from Billy Maximoff to William Kaplan. And it does look like in the next episode, Agatha might be helping Billy unlock those memories in the final trial. Billy then asks,
Wanda Maximoff really dead?
and Agatha responds,
Yes. No. Maybe.
and he says, did you see a body? And she says, I did. Did anyone else? And then is when she said, that's hard to tell, because when she saw that body, it was when she was in the spell cast by Wanda and she was in her Mare of Easttown true crime era. So we know from that most of the things around her that at least she thought were around her were not true, and most of the time it looked like she was just confined to her house and the garden. So this could have been like a doll or a dead animal on her lawn, and she interprets that as a human body for her to investigate. Also, I just don't think that was actually a body at all. Billy scoffs at Agatha's non-answer, and she says,
Want straight answers? Ask a straight lady.
again confirming that Agatha is not straight, and that's more or less being confirmed through what we've seen between her and Rio, and I do think we're going to see a lot more of that in the last episode. They reach the next trial, which is the castle. Agatha and Billy cross the drawbridge into the castle, and on the drawbridge we can see the phases of the moon, something that's very consistent in each trial, representing what type of trial it is and for what type of witch. As they enter the castle, we see one of the best transitions and costume reveals in the MCU, and we see that Agatha is the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, and Billy is Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, two badass witches. Do note that the castle very much so represents the medieval style and times. We see torches and candles, and I actually believe that Lilia was royalty, and this would explain why she's in a castle. And while we see in those flashbacks both her and her maestra or her teacher are so very well dressed for people living in the 1500s. They spot a tarot table and Billy says that he kind of knows tarot. As we look at the table, we can see maybe some alternative form of runes perhaps, as well as zodiac signs and the phases of the moon, and these would help the diviner to divine during the reading. As soon as Billy picks up the tarot cards, an hourglass turns, marking the beginning of the timer of the trial. And we can see on the table engraved is "Your path winds out of time." And they don't know it yet, but this is a reference to Lilia, because we now know her path did wind out of time and she uses her divination to jump backwards and forwards in time. Like I've said a number of times in my previous videos, I think Lilia could have invented tarot cards, or at the very least been the inspiration for the Queen of Cups. Billy decides that he will read for Agatha, and he selects the first card, which is the Chariot, although he didn't really know that. And the Chariot represents control, willpower, success, and determination. And this could refer to Agatha's own determination and willpower throughout her whole life to get what she needs, and in her eyes, that is power. As he places the first card down, a sword drops from the ceiling, meaning for any wrong cards, a sword will drop. The second card is Seven of Swords, generally representing betrayal, deception, and resorting to corruptive methods to achieve your goal. However, it's reversed, meaning that Agatha is actually being truthful, which Billy scoffs at and doesn't really believe. And another sword falls again. So what are they doing wrong? Agatha's patience wears thin, and it's her turn. As she says,
Tarot is a con like any other. There's no skill.
It's not true.
and we see through Lilia later on that it does require a lot of skill. Agatha places the cards down sporadically, causing swords to drop left, right, and centre, and she cackles while this is happening, just like the Wicked Witch of the West. Agatha says that it's a pure numbers game and they should keep going until they get the right combination of cards, or until the ceiling runs out of swords. And cheekily, Billy says,
I'm not sure how much math you did back in Salem, but that will take forever.
the tower table begins to spin and the ceiling starts to descend, meaning you'll either get stabbed with the sword for the wrong card or crushed for taking too long. Billy then says, I wish Lilia was here, and we actually then pan to Lilia. Lilia says, I was falling, and Jen says, well, we both were. And this seems to be in some sort of underground tunnel or passage after their trip in the mud. And if only they had known this sooner, Sharon's bag might have been saved, and Sharon may have actually been able to escape. Lilia doesn't remember what she said to Jen, but Jennifer explains that Lilia instructed them that they must follow this tunnel and look for shelving. And then she remembers, Teen kicked us off the road, and Jennifer corrects him.
The son of the Scarlet Witch kicked us off the road.
And Lilia is shocked.
Teen is the son of the Scarlet Witch? How do you know?
And Jennifer just gives her a look, and Lilia is like, oh, I told you. But she can't remember. We then see the moment that Jen says to Lilia,
But you're being extra wispy.
Wispy?
Kooky.
and of course, this refers back to a vision that Lilia had in episode 4 during Alice's trial. And then we see some of the visions start to add up together. And Lilia realizes, oh, I'm visiting from the past, Alice. Alice, don't. And then we move back again to episode 3, try to save Agatha. So put together, she's saying,
Alice, don't try to save Agatha.
but of course it's too late. Then Lilia's maestra appears. This is her teacher that taught her her skill. And she says, Lilia, what do you see? And then we see the younger version of Lilia Calderu. And again, take note how well dressed they are for the 1500s and how they're in some sort of a lovely architectured garden. This appears to be the same maestra that Lilia saw in her hallucination in episode 3 when she was sick and Death, aka Rio, came for her. Her maestra then realizes, Capisco, I see, you are visiting. And she asks Lilia,
How long has it been?
Centuries.
And I think this means that Lilia hasn't regressed back to the past in quite some time. And we see in this episode that Lilia learns to focus and control her abilities, which may explain why she hasn't regressed back to the past in centuries. We learn that Lilia has regressed back to her very first lesson.
Tea leaves. I was bad at tea leaves.
And her maestra disagrees and says this is something you have told yourself and continue to tell yourself, but it's not true. Interestingly, we did see a leaf reading tent next to Lilia's tent at William Kaplan's bar mitzvah. Maestra asks Lilia again, what do you see, Lilia? And Lilia looks into the bottom of the cup, and we go back to the tunnel where Jen and Lilia are walking through. And Lilia isn't too happy when Jen says that she's confused. And then Jen says, don't worry, I haven't heard them since the subway station, referring to the Salem 7. Now, personally, I find it so sketchy and suspicious that the failed Westview public transportation system that Sharon or Mrs. Hart referred to in episode 3 is actually on the Witches' Road, because this would then imply that the Witches' Road is a physical, geographical location in the 616 universe Earth in Westview of all places, where in the comics it's another plane of existence like the astral plane or the afterlife of Wakanda or the Druid, the Egyptian afterlife. So I find it very suspicious. In theory, you wouldn't even have to sing the ballad to conjure the door to open the Witches' Road, because if you know how to access the old subway station, you can just do it that way. And Jen says that Lilia had mentioned that there was something about gaps. And then Lilia says,
The flow of time is an illusion, Jen.
and of course this is true given what we've seen with the Sacred Timeline, the TVA, and Loki season 1 and 2. Lilia opens up to Jen and says,
When I was a child, I experienced my life out of sequence. I would get these flashes, these gaps.
now it's happening again and getting worse. And Jen asks, well, why is it getting worse? And Lilia says, maybe because I'm close to the end. But we know exactly what Lilia meant when she said close to the end. And then we jump to the future where Lilia is already in the trial, dressed as Glinda the Green Witch, and Agatha, as the Wicked Witch of the West, is on top of her.
Get off me!
Lilia says, Agatha, what are you doing?
Did you not see imminent impalement in your future?
And pushes Agatha off. And then, as Lilia stands up, she sees Billy for the first time since he sent them on their trip in the mud. And she pushes him against the wall. And Billy's like, hey, I thought we were cool. And she says, we are not cool, teenager.
Damn, using his full name.
Now, this is telling because by the end she will refer to him as Billy or the son of the Scarlet Witch, but she hasn't actually lived that sequence where she gets that information, which is why she says teenager now. Billy apologizes and reads her mind.
I wasn't hiding my power from you. I didn't know that I could. I'm not lying to you.
I wasn't hiding my power from you. And Lilia is surprised because, of course, she wasn't expecting him to answer the question that was in her mind. And he continues to answer the questions that he's reading.
Of course, I would have used it to save Alice.
And Lilia says, you're reading my mind. And he says,
Only because it's so loud. No.
referring back to when in WandaVision, Billy was complaining that there was so much noise in his head, and that's why he liked when he went over to Agatha's house that she was so quiet and he didn't have to listen to all her thoughts. And this is something we've seen before with telepaths, especially, for example, Jean Grey in the X-Men films being overwhelmed by hearing all the voices. Lilia says to Billy, I remember you now, your bar mitzvah. And she turns to Jen and says, aren't you furious? And Jen gives such a good answer.
I mean, always, but collectively, we moved on.
At your prompting, Dory.
And clearly, just like Lilia had told Jen the instructions of what to follow, find the shelf, etc., she obviously said earlier when they first arrived, oh, we're cool now, kid. But she doesn't remember this. And you can see Billy is not proud of his actions. He's remorseful. But of course, he cannot control either his magical powers or his telepathy. Lilia takes a moment and realizes that they are dressed as famous pop culture witches.
What am I wearing? This is so demeaning.
Do note that Jen is dressed as Grimhilda, the witch, was actually the evil queen in disguise in Snow White, which is actually kind of applicable given her beauty and vanity that we've seen before. And I think it's quite ironic that she doesn't present as the evil queen, but she presents as the witch Grimhilda, because it's a nice little nod at saying the true beauty of someone comes from within and is not reflected on their outside appearance. Or, as we've seen since we met Lilia, Lilia strongly opposes the stereotypes, misconceptions and rumour mongering of witches, especially because she has been victim to what happens when people actually believe in those tropes. I do think that the characters that each witch got are specific to them. The most obvious one being Agatha as the Wicked Witch of the West, because like in The Wizard of Oz, Agatha has demonstrated those evil and arguably the stereotypical tropes of witches being evil, doing harm and not to be trusted. However, you could also look at it as Elphaba from Wicked, where Agatha is misunderstood, and I think both are applicable. Lilia is Glinda the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz, and this too is quite a self-explanatory one, as just like the meaning of the Queen of Cups, Lilia does represent those qualities from Glinda the Good Witch and the Queen of Cups. My favourite is Billy as Maleficent, and of course this is resembling Maleficent from Snow White, but I also think it also serves as a reference to the Angelina Jolie Maleficent from the live action films. In the live action version, Maleficent is much more of a true witch, is more grounded in nature, and is quite protective of her family, even though it means sometimes she may not always do the right thing. And I do think this can be applicable to Billy, especially with his concern for Tommy and how when his emotions get the better of him, he does things he later regrets. Billy then asks,
Are you the one who cast the sigil on me?
and she says,
I saw what was going to happen to you that night and who you would become. I knew you'd need time.
and I think she says this and she plays the sigil, not much to do with the Witch's Road, but in fact because when you're trying to find your identity and find yourself, especially in this complex situation, the last thing you need is the knowledge and the pressure of being known as Wiccan, the son of the Scarlet Witch, who, like the Scarlet Witch, was also prophesied as seen in Mount Wundagore, which is where Chthon, one of the first demons, engraved those forbidden incantations that would later be transcribed into the Darkhold, and also engraved both the prophecy of the Scarlet Witch and her son Wiccan, which will be a lot of pressure. So she did it to give him time to be able to get to know himself slowly but surely instead of this sudden pressure. Suddenly, multiple swords come down from the ceiling and the ceiling lowers even more. This perhaps is a nudge from the trial or the road that they need to stop talking and get a move on. Lilia says, where did I go wrong? Then we go to Lilia in episode 5 during Agatha's trial when the spirits are screaming and she says, I hated this the first time. And now we know why she said it, because this is her future self revisiting that moment and saying, I didn't like this the first time and I don't like it now. We then go back to her vision in episode 2 when Teen and Agatha first recruited her, and then we go back to her childhood, to her Maestra. Maestra asks Lilia, tell me about your life now. Are you rooted in nature, nimble with your craft? And Lilia says, well, if I was, I wouldn't be here now. Maestra then asks Lilia, do you have a coven? And Lilia just laughs and she says,
It didn't work out for me the first time. It's sure not going well now.
Lilia asks her Maestra, just tell me what to do that I can control this.
Your task is not to control, but to see.
Lilia then goes back to the tunnel with Jennifer and she finds Billy's spell book, so it really must have fallen while they were on their hexenbessen or brooms. Jen says, you said this used to happen when you were younger, why did it stop? And Lilia says, because I wanted it to. I ignored it. And Jen asks why, and Lilia says,
because all I saw was death.
Do remember that moment for later. We can then hear Billy and Agatha bickering over how to play the trial. And they have reached the shelves and they are able to go into the trial just as Billy says, I wish Lilia was here. Coincidence or not? As Jen and Lilia fall into the trial, Billy says, you're alive, and he looks relieved and pleasantly surprised. And of course, he didn't mean to kill them. He was just overwhelmed with a power he cannot control. Billy does look worried and maybe even a little scared as to what the reaction would be. But Lilia says,
relax, baby. We're cool.
We are?
Agatha points out to Lilia and Jennifer of the threat of the falling swords and the collapsing ceiling. And Lilia looks at the tarot table and says, my task is to see, following the advice of her Maestra.
Your task is not to control, but to see.
Lilia asks, who's the querent? And Billy says,
You mean the subject? Me. I guess I'm a queerant.
Emphasizing the queer and queerant because, of course, like most of the cast, Billy is queer. Lilia says that Billy must ask his question, to which Agatha tries to tell Billy,
How are we gonna get out?
but Lilia explains it must be vital to his journey on Earth. And then Agatha and Jen bicker over what the question should be. Lilia insists that proper tarot takes time and care, obviously contrary to Agatha's cynical view of it just being a con requiring no magic or skill, which we know is not true. Billy then asks,
Am I William or am I Billy?
and Lilia says that's a very good question. And as he asks the question, the ceiling stops moving. Lilia then explains the setup of the tarot card read. Lilia says that this is the safe passage spread, and a spread in tarot refers to a specific pattern in which the cards are laid out. And of course, this is in relation to Billy's question if he is William or Billy. The first card is You, the Traveller, and we can see that goes in the center. Next comes What's Missing, the reason for your quest. Here's the path behind, wounds suffered, lessons learned. Here is the path ahead, a space for growth and discovery. Of course, you will face obstacles, preceding a potential windfall. You must overcome all to reach your destination. And we can see this too goes in the center, overlapping on the Traveller card, but instead of being vertical, it goes horizontal.
What must I remark?
Lilia instructs Billy to hold the question in his mind and push everything else away. Lilia shuffles the cards, spreads them out, and Billy picks one. Billy selects the Magician for his Traveller card, and we've actually seen this card before in the end credit title for Patti LuPone, foreshadowing this episode.
You have enormous potential and the ability to turn all of your goals into reality.
This would make sense given he is
Listen,
the son
boys.
of the Scarlet Witch, prophesied to be Wiccan. However, once Lilia places this card down, a sword falls. But Lilia says we'll just keep going. The next is What's Missing, and Billy selects the Sun, representing good fortune, joy, and reunion.
Reunion.
Billy hones in on that word reunion because, of course, he wants his brother Tommy, and this is the card of what he's missing. However, another sword comes down, and Agatha says, how are we supposed to get this right when tarot is completely subjective? As Billy selects another card, another sword comes down directly above Lilia, and this is when Agatha jumps and saves Lilia from the sword, which is also that moment that we saw earlier, and this then goes back to episode 2, when, while they were about to sing the Ballad of the Witch's Road, Lilia says, get off me. We then go to the next outburst from episode 4, when she says, you know, we really hated each other in the beginning, but now... And then back to the outburst in episode 3. I love you guys. So Lilia is referring to Agatha and the rest of the coven.
Get off me! You know, we really hated each other from the beginning, but now I love you guys.
We're back with Lilia's Maestra, and Lilia asks, what am I missing? And Maestra says, exacto, why are you on this journey? Which Lilia says, I didn't want to come, I wanted my power back. But Maestra knows she's bluffing.
Is it gone? Where did it go? This is not the true reason.
Where did it go? Is it gone? And then Lilia becomes more vulnerable and says,
I'm a forgotten woman.
and Maestra says, well, remember yourself then. And Lilia says, what's worth remembering? That you died? That I saw it coming?
Our entire coven wiped out by a fever. I saw it, I told you, but it didn't change anything.
So Lilia says, our entire coven wiped out by a fever. And if we look at Lilia's age and her life, she is 450 years old, meaning she was born in 1576, because of course in the MCU currently it's 2026. So let's have a look at what was going on in history at that period. In Italy, there were a number of smaller plague or Black Death outbreaks after the large pandemic. Plague broke out in Italy between the years 1533 and 1575 and 1575 to 1578. However, these are just before or just after Lilia's birth, meaning she would only be between 0 and 2 years old, so she wouldn't remember it. So the most likely outbreak she is referring to is in the first half of the 17th century, also known as the 1600s, and in the year 1600, Lilia would have been 24, which would make a lot more sense. The plague claimed 1.7 million victims in Italy, or 14% of the population. Another outbreak, the Great Plague of Milan, took place in the years 1628 to 1633, and Lilia would have been aged 53 at the beginning of that outbreak. Another plague outbreak was between 1656 to 57 and was the last major catastrophic plague outbreak in Italy, where it killed over half of Naples' 300,000 inhabitants. Lilia would have been around 80 at that, which it sounds old, but don't forget these witches live a lot longer. I mean, Lilia has been alive for 450 years or 5 centuries. However, it is hard to confirm her age considering in her hallucination she was quite young, but of course witches can make themselves appear a lot younger for a lot longer, so we don't really know for sure. Approximately between the age of 0 and 80, Lilia would have lived through 5 Black Death or bubonic plague outbreaks. Furthermore, coupled with this is the fact that this would have been during one of the most extensive times in Europe for witch trials. Between the year 1560 and 1670, more than 40,000 people were executed for accusations of witchcraft. To really highlight the severity of this, between the age of 0 and 94, Lilia lived through 5 Black Death outbreaks and the worst time in history for a witch in Europe. Lilia would have likely have seen the most amount of torture and execution of witches in the group, with the exception of Rio, because she was at every execution. And while she never spoke of it, we did see in episode 4 in Alice's trial that Lilia was triggered and emotional by the murals of witches being tortured and executed, and we could even hear the screams, possibly referring to one of Lilia's memories. Now, let's have a look at why Lilia says, "I'm a forgotten woman," and what does that mean? While yes, she may be referring to her lack of ability to control her divination and her visions as she opened up to Jennifer about, but it could also relate to the fact that all of the people she loved and cared to, and all the people she was connected to, have long begone. So now, as she admitted, she lives as a hermit, so she's probably quite lonely. Also, she may mean forgotten woman in the fact that nowadays with science, it's very hard for her to make a living with her abilities, as it would have been much easier a couple of 100 years back when people would have gone to fortune tellers, etc. to get tarot readings and divination. Now, Maestra says something that Lilia said just after Alice died.
Death comes for us all.
Death comes for it all. And Lilia says, "You make it sound like a comfort." And Maestra says, "It's what we all have in common." So Lilia asks,
When will it come for me?
but Maestra doesn't respond. Lilia then remembers, "I was falling, so I will fall." Maestra then asks Lilia,
What will you do with your remaining time?
Lilia is then able to go back when her and Jen first fell down into the tunnel, and she's able to remember everything and start putting the pieces in place. Take note of their surroundings. This looks to be that subway station that Jen discussed earlier, and I don't know why, but it really puts me off that this is here. Lilia explains that it's a divination trial tarot and they need to find the bookshelf to get to it, which is obviously the bookshelf that they fell through to access the trial in the first place. You can see that Lilia is actually elated and just full of joy that things are starting to make sense and all the pieces are falling into place. She's no longer confused, and you can see that it had really affected her, so it's nice to see this little boost. However, suddenly we hear animal and insect noises.
The 7.
It's the Salem 7. And Lilia and Jen, thankfully, are able to hide from them. Lilia says to Jen, "I'm going to take this path to my trial. Agatha and Billy need my help. I hope you'll join me." And Jennifer says, "Why?" And she says,
"Because you are my sister in the craft."
which is something Jennifer says in episode 5 in Agatha's trial.
We're sisters in the craft, remember?
Jen does contemplate going down the route of the subway station, likely to exit the road, but then decides, "I will follow with Lilia." We're all back in the trial, and Lilia now knows what she did wrong. "My path winds out of time. I am the traveller. I was reading for the wrong person. She needs to read for herself and not for Billy." Lilia says,
I am
the Queen of Cups.
Now you see.
so Lilia is the Queen of Cups. This is her traveller card. And we can see through the flashback that the camera focus has distorted a bit. It's more of like a fisheye. And this gives us more of the impression of a memory and looking back and forth in time. The Queen of Cups. She is empathetic, intuitive, and her inner voice is to be heard. And we can see that the Queen of Cups tarot card resembles Lilia's younger self in her garden with her maestra and the castle with a cup. She places her traveler card down, and the ceiling does move down more, but no sword drops. So this looks to be more like an indication of how much time they have left and not placing the wrong card. So next is what's missing. Three of Pentacles, collaboration, community, singular voices waiting to harmonize.
I needed you. My coven.
Which is like so cute. Now Lilia first read the Three of Pentacles tarot card when she was writing the names of everyone destined to be part of the coven. Now just like on the tarot card, on the eviction notice where she writes the names is the Celtic symbol of the triquetra and the three pentagrams like on the tarot card. The tarot card also represents when the coven was singing the Ballad of the Witch's Road, and you can make out everyone on the coven. We can make out Jen, Billy, Agatha, Alice, Lilia, and the Green Witch, who I want to say is Rio because Rio is still a Green Witch, as we later confirm, because Death is the first Green Witch, but we'll talk about that later. However, the ceiling continues to lower. The next card is the Path Behind, Knight of Wands, full of fire, fights bravely, which she read in episode 5 when Alice was protecting Agatha, despite this resulted in her own death. And actually, Alice resembles the same stance and position of the one on the tarot card. The next card is the Path Ahead, the High Priestess. Immense spiritual power, unable or unwilling to use it though, which Lilia did read when she first met Jennifer, the High Priestess, and it also refers to the fact that Jennifer is bound.
Unable or unwilling to use it.
Like the other tarot cards, it resembles Jennifer. The next card is the Obstacle. We see the Three of Swords, heartbreak, sorrow, grief. And Lilia did read this one in episode 5 when Agatha was distraught over the potential loss of Billy's life. This also applies to Agatha during her journey on the Witch's Road, because up until Billy's identity was revealed, Agatha was really hoping that Billy might be her son, Nicholas Scratch, who she is still grieving for. Just like the other tarot cards, with Agatha and the three branches, it resembles that of the tarot card, the Three of Swords. The next card is the Windfall, the Tower reversed, representing disaster, destruction, sudden upheaval. But reversed means miraculous transformation, which Lilia read in episode 6 during William Kaplan's bar mitzvah. The tarot card includes Billy's crown and the Salem 7, and soon will be fulfilled as the Salem 7 will come to their end, just like on the tarot card and using this tarot card. This would match the miraculous transformation of Billy Maximoff surviving the destruction of the Westview Hex and being able to use William Kaplan's body to continue living, which is miraculous in itself, combined with the fact that he got to keep his powers from the Hex. Finally, the Destination card, and this is the big reveal. We see Lilia and Jen's bodies fall from the road, and Lilia can see a dark figure in the shadows, and she says, "Who is that?" And we hear Rio's voice.
Don't you recognize me, Lilia?
And we see flashbacks of Rio coming from Sharon's grave, Rio mentioning getting her bodies in Alice's trial, and when the Ouija board spelled out that death was with them. We hear Rio say,
"In the end, all roads lead to me."
And we see Rio, but this is not her normal look that we've seen while she's been on the road. This is her death look. We can see her face is a skull. She's in a much more hooded outfit. She has a crown. In one hand, she has a dagger, and another, a flower. And Lilia says Rio is death as she selects the Death Tarot card, which resembles the appearance of Rio. Now, Agatha grabs the card from Lilia and places it down on the tarot table. And this could be interpreted as a bit of a metaphor of Agatha interfering with death, as she has been doing for centuries. Lilia has then successfully completed her trial. She has read her tarot cards for herself, and the ceiling stops moving and retracts back upwards. Then what was looking to be an Iron Maiden, a torture device, was actually disguised as the exit. Billy asks what happened, and Lilia reveals to the others,
Rio, she's dead. The original Green Witch.
And Billy asks Agatha, is this true? And she gave the best response.
What can I say? I like the bad boys.
The death card and seeing death in her true form is what gives Lilia the sign that she is indeed close to death, as she mentioned in this episode, and she takes this as the sign to sacrifice herself to stop the Salem 7 and defend and protect her coven, embracing what everybody's final destination will be, Rio, aka death. Following that, we can hear those animalistic and insect noises again. It's the Salem 7. They're here. Lilia tells everyone to go into the Iron Maiden, which looks like just the torture device, but is really more of like a secret exit or secret passage, which is often common in castles. Lilia rushes them out of the castle, and as Agatha leaves, Lilia says,
When she calls you a coward, hit the deck.
and this must be referring to what we have actually heard in a promo of Rio saying to Agatha, "You're a coward." And this must be from the final battle that we will see next week, which we've seen some tiny snippets of. As Billy leaves, Lilia gives Billy his spell book that he had lost and she had found. Jennifer doesn't want to go before Lilia, but like she read in her tarot reading, Lilia says to Jennifer,
"You're the path ahead, Jennifer."
And this must signify that Jen has some important work to do in the future, and she may be the only member of the coven to actually survive the road, and we may see more of in the MCU. Lilia closes the door and says, "I loved being a witch," and shuts it, and Jen shouts no. So this is the moment that Lilia has committed to sacrificing herself to protect her coven. And after all, she is just embracing what was always going to be her destination, death. Just as she closes the doors, the Salem 7 enter in their animal forms, and Lilia gives a little speech. You may not know this about the road, but when you successfully complete a trial like I just did, it's not a good idea to overstay your welcome. Usually, something terrible happens. While Lilia is delivering her speech, they transform back into human forms while they all surround Lilia.
Disaster. Destruction. Sudden upheaval.
And these are the exact words that Lilia used when she first read the Tower tarot card. Lilia then says, "Just like the tower, upright." And as soon as she puts the card upright, gravity is inverted and the Salem 7 begin falling upwards towards that ceiling full of swords. And Lilia holds on to the tarot table because she wants to make sure that they all die before she then sacrifices herself. However, many are speculating that not all of them actually die, and I had to go back and rewatch in slow motion and try and count. And while all 7 were in the castle, only 5 impaled onto the swords. And let's not forget, there are 2 members who can transform into flying animals, the owl and the crow, and the leader, Vertigo, transforms into a cicada, a tiny insect. So any of those 3 could reasonably survive by transforming and escaping. So 5 out of 7 die and 2 manage to escape. I assume one of them had to have been a flying animal, so either the crow or the owl. But I also suspect that Vertigo, their leader, also escaped. So maybe we will actually get to see a proper fight between the 2 surviving members and Agatha. Then Lilia lets go herself, and as she falls, she's embracing that final destination that she read in her reading, death. As Lilia falls, it fades to black, and we are then back in 1500s Sicily, where we see the younger version of Lilia running to her maestra for a lesson. So it appears that Lilia went back to live her younger years and to basically live those gaps that she told Jen about.
When I was a child, I experienced my life out of sequence. I would get these flashes, these gaps.
And that concludes episode 7 of Agatha All Along, Death's Hand in Mine. Wow, that episode was 10 out of 10, top class, like, wow. This is definitely my favorite episode so far, and I really think they should be submitting this for awards, and they should hopefully get some awards, not only for writing, directing, costumes, but for Patti LuPone's performance. That was amazing. We got so much range, and a bravo, because writing an episode where you're jumping back and forth through time, like we saw in Loki, it can be quite confusing and a tricky thing to do. So to pull it off this smoothly, where everything made sense, bravo. And what do we think of the demise of the Salem 7? Yes, 2 may be alive. It does look like only 5 of them died and 2 disappeared or survived. I will say I had expected a larger fight between them and Agatha and maybe the rest of the coven, considering there were 7 of them. And, you know, all we saw from them was their animal transformation and them transitioning from animal to human, but also it was mostly the mythology of them, if you will. You know, what was so menacing about them wasn't necessarily what they did, it was what they could do, and because they look so creepy and scary. And I mean, I loved them. I was really intrigued to get to know more, but I will say I had hoped we would have got to see more, and the most we got to a fight was when the owl jumped on Billy and maybe when Vertigo attacked them with all the insects, but that was the closest we got to a fight. So look, maybe we will see the other 2, or maybe that was the end for the Salem 7, but I did enjoy them, so it's a good complaint. Now let's discuss Rio as Death. Personally, I love that the physical embodiment of death is a green witch because it just makes so much sense. We are born to the earth, and when we die, we return to the earth, which is such a fundamental concept around death and living things. Combined with the fact that Rio is a woman, it signifies the maternity of nature, as women being not only the people to bring us into the world, but now with Rio, the ones who bring us out of it. Could argue as well that Rio is the physical embodiment of Mother Nature, because death is such a crucial part of the natural world. Not only that, but it makes death such a natural process in the MCU. I also think that it not only translates as a green witch's death, but death is a green witch because it empowers the natural world. I'm not sure if this is going to be the case, but it would be genius if Rio's appearance changed depending what capacity she is acting in. So if she's just being a green witch like we see now on the Witch's Road, she just appears as a green witch. But if she is collecting bodies and taking lives, then she appears as the hooded skeletal figure with her dagger, which is why I've been emphasizing the repetition of hooded outfits for Rio in Agatha All Along. So I think when Rio appears and she says, "Don't you recognize me, Lilia?" I don't think that was just, "Oh, you know me, it's Rio, we were on the road together." Lilia has said all I saw was death in her divinations, and that she saw her entire coven wiped out by a fever, aka the Black Death. So Death is saying to Lilia, you should recognize me because I have been in your life a lot. I also really appreciate this change, that it's not just the cosmic entity Death, but it's Rio Vidal, the first Green Witch. And I love that Death is the first or the original Green Witch, and that makes so much sense. Also, we see this reflected when we do see Death in its truest form, that in one hand she has a dagger to represent death that we've seen throughout, but on the other we see a flower to represent the life and the Green Witch as well, and that reflects her pajamas from Agatha's trial that had both a black leaf and a green leaf. Now next week we see the final 2 episodes of Agatha All Along, episodes 8 and 9, and it is believed that episode 8 is the finale, and episode 9 may be a flashback sequence of Agatha's life and likely Rio and Death's life with Agatha. Now we do know one trial remains, and while it looked like it would be Rio's trial because it was a morgue or a mortuary, it actually makes sense that it's Billy's trial. Now that we know Billy is an official member of the coven and Death or Rio is just a visitor or a tourist on the Witch's Road, it has to be Billy's, and it makes sense it would be a mortuary or a morgue because he has to figure out who is he, as he asked Lilia in this episode. Is he William or is he Billy? And I think what will happen, and like we've seen in the trailers, Agatha seems to help him find those memories that he's missing of both William Kaplan and Billy Maximoff, and that will forge together to create Billy Kaplan, aka Wiccan. There could be that potential that Rio or Death wants William Kaplan's body, and perhaps if he doesn't figure it out by the end, Death gets to take it. Now we also know there is a final battle between Agatha and Death or Rio, and many of us are speculating that this is actually a fight over Billy, that Death wants to take that body, but Agatha is not going to let Death take him, and I suppose is maybe a do-over for Nicholas Scratch, who she wasn't able to save. Perhaps she can save Billy, and hopefully that will contribute to an auntie-nephew-like relationship. What do you think Agatha and Rio are going to fight about? And what do you think we're going to see in episode 9 if it is that flashback sequence? So let me know in the comments below what you think is going to happen next week and your thoughts of this week's episode. Be sure to check out my socials in the description, and you can find my TikTok link where we also discuss Agatha All Along. Be sure to give the video a like and click that subscribe button for more. I'm Nico at Pop Incursions. See you next time.